About 25,000 people in Trafalgar Square. All that began to unwind when the government, particularly local government, started introducing identity politics. They didn't want the communities to unite because they felt a threat. They said, look, you are Indian, you would have your own organization, we'll give you some funds. It's peanuts for them to give you a few thousand quid. Unfortunately, hungry people always go for it. There's a loaf around. They grab it, So this organization began to split in all directions. And I believe strongly in local organizations. There's no point having a meeting like in a place like this. You've got to have a base. And we built the most successful organization in Lewisham, called the Lewisham Black People's Alliance, because it's mainly Caribbean African minorities who are most prevalent in them. Now we have got into a situation, we have come a full circle. Still Britain is one of the most civilized places where anybody can aspire to live. That notwithstanding, there are dark forces at work. And once they start picking on people, they cannot discriminate between an African and a person like me or any colored person, They think we are intruding into their territory. It doesn't matter how big you are, whether you are a Tata or one of the biggest employees in the country. It doesn't matter to me. If you walk along the road, they'll call you a Paki bastard or whatever. Although these gentlemen may not have anything to do with Pakistan. So this is, now how do we deal with it? And my prescription is, if we act as a visible minority bloc, we have a very substantial vote. When we were fighting, there wasn't that number of people. Much fewer than now. Almost 11% of the population are visible minorities. This gives us enormous leverage with politics.
Once you get the theoretical framework for what is going on, then it's easy for us to understand how we need to act. Now, I'm going to start by putting this in ideological state apparatuses, which are all the institutions. Racism continues to dominate global headlines in Europe. And I brought this paper called The Rising Tide of the White Nationalist Terror. And when I say black people, we're talking about non-Western, because that was used across the colonial world. The whole idea was to use race discourse. It becomes evident that there is a link between racism and colonial domination, based on the ideology of the Western bourgeoisie who used classical discourse, because that's the classical discourse that's been there throughout, as the framework for repression and domination. I'm going to leave it there. So this discourse is still continuing to be used.
Things have changed. Mr. Rahman said, the new generation, they consider themselves very, very British, very anglicized. It's not good. But Akbar's work will help the people who are not in the mainstream. You see, they need help because language problem, communication problem. Our youngsters are very
I'm quite happy to
obviously voted to leave, and it's going to happen. Of course, it could have a negative impact, country as a whole, but maybe minorities more so, because majority of the unfortunately minorities, whether they are black or Asian, they are living in very concentrated areas and in a very low economic base. Unfortunately, answer is the education.
Staying or leaving the EU, and the drama is going to be played out in the next 4 or 5 weeks.
Sure.
And we need to actually tell our people what we think is in their interest, what they ought to do to protect their own interest.
Well, ideally, obviously, we should have stayed in.
If you come from a sort of successful business community, you may find the free market movement and all that to your advantage. But if you are from the community as a whole, you're not going to get any of these benefits. Brexit is designed to actually establish, it's a very bureaucratic structure for a start. It's not democratic at all. There's nothing democratic about it.
People will really understand where those ISIS.
As a minority community, what do we do to safeguard our interest in the scenario of
When
Brexit?
you say interests, what are we talking about?
How do we safeguard our interest? How do we protect our money? How do we protect our jobs? How do we protect our kids? How do we develop as a society? How do we better integrate in the society? How do we develop businesses?
By solidarity.
Yeah.
Only one word,
Can
solidarity.
I
Yes.
be very frank?
Yes.
I'm here from a very left. I'm going to tell you this. The institutions don't care about us. Maybe if we kind of get that right. Right about now, we are not represented. And as Mr. Mani said, whoever they are bringing in from our own groups are not there to represent us.
Us.
Because
Exactly.
they are not speaking on our behalf. So can we just understand? Can I just speak? Because we're just going to go around and round in circles. So if we can understand that the institutions are there just to provide the basics for us. The UK is here. As long as we know you will get your basics, the rest is up to you now. Because I don't understand why we keep clamoring to work with people who don't really want to work with you. Maybe you have to understand that. They don't want to unless you are prepared.
Are you saying that we need to start a revolution?
It's not a revolution.
What is it then?
There is no such thing as a revolution that's going to work. Once we understand that this is where we are going, how do we change our own attitude? We can cry racism from here to high heaven. This thing has been going on for years. So what is new on the ground?
Solidarity is the...
So if we are not, and what I also want us to understand, that when we talk about capitalism and money, remember that one of the first things that you want to do, if you want to bring in this new ideology, was a Western ideology that was hoisted on non-Western. What was taken away was our culture. Once you take your cultural base away, you can do anything. Here, a lot of us are crying racism, but at the end of the day, how many of us actually understand our own culture? That's what I'm saying. We're here, but a lot of people, the culture has been removed. When we are now, because there's a new generation of young people who are running around over here who think they are actually British, and they're saying you're not. At one particular point, someone's going to remind you that go back to where you're coming from, because that's really what's going on right now. A lot of these kids cannot even go back to where they're coming from. And the only way colonialism worked was the racial ideology. That was one of the mission to civilize. If you understand colonialism worked, it was a capitalist based to exploit, to dominate and repress. The US issue also is all about Trump using racial cards
I mean,
based.
we are moving from globalization to deglobalization.
Well,
Everybody has
actually-
become so attached to their identities.
Yes.
What's happening in India, what's
It's all
happening in
about-
US and
it's all
UK.
about capitalism.
Yeah, it's all about
Absolutely.
capitalism, and it's all about their identities and ideologies.
Identity and ideology race, because right now there is not that. It is all about controlling the mode of production narrative. Who wants to take over the mode of production? Capitalism. We have China now coming in, and because Africa is also right now, the continent wants to also take control of its own mode of production. And people are scared. This is what Toni Morrison was saying in the US, mourning for whiteness. Because once African Americans, the moment Obama came up, the problem was they equate race with capitalism. If I get a job, if I become, a lecturer or a top, someone from from an ethnic minority or marginalized coming over, I have taken over the mode production narrative. That is exactly what they do not want us to do.
Practically claiming their resources, which they don't
And that
like.
is all
Yeah.
the problem is. Spike Lee, who is one of the only, and can I also understand, only black in the United States, the only black filmmaker in the United States, and they gave him a hard time because he has taken over the production narrative. Once you take over the film, because it is part of the ideological state apparatuses, he is challenging it. It means that right now he is visible. I have a problem because I am working on the works of Africa's first filmmaker, Usman Sembène. That is a problem because Usman Sembène took over the mode of production narrative from the media and challenged the dominant discourse.
So same thing is happening in India as well, because that dominant discourse is being dominated by particular class and particular ideologies, and that is being reflected in their behavior, and people are
So
trying
this
to
is
imbibe
what
that.
we need to
I think
understand.
here, if I interject now,
Yeah.
very important,
Sure.
is that all this unilateralism, nationalism, it's not groups, it's certain majorities who are trying to put their point of view dominance over everybody else at a national level. And the main sufferer will be the minorities, wherever they are. Coming back to the Trump narrative on racism and so on, what is happening now? I've seen since the 60s, I've come across, I have a personal experience of racism. Because in 60s, if I went for a job, I was at school at that time, and you couldn't get a job. They wouldn't give you a job. Blatantly, they'll just tell you, sorry, I'm not going to give you a job. Now, the thing is, what is happening now, nobody can stop. Likes of these few minorities like English League and so on, they are there. But post-colonialism, things have changed, they are changing, diversity is there.
In what way?
Actually, so that's, as Aqua just confirmed her research, how it's going to benefit the invisible minorities. Because there will always be those people who are underprivileged, not represented in a very proper way because they are very isolated. They don't, obviously, they're not going to mix with the local population, no matter what. There are huge number of groups from ethnic minorities who live very isolated life. The one who are, like yourselves, are well-heeled education-wise and so on, well-informed. Of course, we need to move on as well. But there are people who need help, who can benefit from the research Aqua has done or doing, and other people. They definitely need help. Now, one thing I want to say is that it is. I think it should be realized. The European colonialists were the only one who sort of controlled the populations, either whether it was South America or Far East or Africa, especially in Africa. No other empire has done that in that way. Slavery obviously happened and so on. At the moment, in America, 60 million people, majority of them are white. They go to collect food from food banks. They are so underprivileged. Yet it's a world
60 million.
More than 60 million. This is accounted.
A fifth of
Now,
the population.
America is the richest country in the world in all respects.
Yeah.
And what they're doing, they're squandering money, fighting wars which have nothing to do with them.